Cheers, Rockets fans. Welcome to The Locker Line, an exclusive podcast from the home of the Rockets.
Whoa!
Sports Talk 790.
Rockets!
The Locker Line is proudly served to you by Carbox Clutch City Lager.
It is good!
Oh, yeah? Red Nation, get ready. Get ready. The Locker Line starts now.
Welcome aboard.
Thanks for checking out another new episode of The Lager Line, again served to you courtesy of Clutch City Lager of Carbach Brewing. I'm Ben Dubose, your host, editor of USA Today's Rockets Wire, and contributor to Sports Talk 790, official flagship radio station of your Houston Rockets. As usual, I'm joined by Paulo Alves, our co-host and producer out of Portugal. You can follow him on Twitter/X at Paulo Alves NBA, and me on there at Ben Dubose. So, as we chat this Wednesday, March 12th, the Rockets are now 40-25. They've won 3 straight games, 2 over the Pelicans, who at this point are largely in tank mode, but a much more impressive one by 13 points over the Orlando Magic on Monday night in the first game of the post-Amen Thompson era. We hope that era will be short-lived because, as I recapped on Monday's Amen injury reaction show, 10 to 14 days, especially when the Rockets are playing all 500 or below teams over that stretch. It's not too long to begin with, and it should be manageable given the opponents. But nonetheless, whenever you lose a guy that I think most people consider to be your best player, it's difficult. And so for the Rockets to come out and beat a solid Orlando team, I know the record is just 30-36, but they've had a ton of injuries all season long. With Paolo Banchero, Franz Wagner in the lineup, it's a competent team, especially defensively. They're third in the NBA. I know they've had their struggles on offense, which the Rockets exploited, holding them to 84 points, fewest points allowed by the Rockets in any game this season. But that's a very good team with playoff experience. And so to go out and get a double-digit win without 2 of your starters, no Amen Thompson, no Fred VanVleet, any chance of there being a spiraling effect, I think went away by being able to immediately post a win of that magnitude. Not saying it's one that you'll remember at the end of the season, but with the tough luck injury to Amen right when he was about to check out on Saturday night, and it looked like they might get Fred back and didn't. He was listed as questionable going in. To be able that night to respond with a complete win, and after struggling early to put it together, very encouraging. And now all of a sudden it feels like, the vibes were low with the Rockets a week ago. Well, now they've won 3 straight games, and you've got still 4 more on this homestand, all against 500 or below teams, including the Phoenix Suns tonight. So let's start our discussion there. I think, well, first off, Fred VanVleet should be back in the lineup tonight. He is listed as probable. And so for a Rockets team that turned the ball over 20 times against the Magic, by the way, somehow the Rockets are 8-1 this year with 20 or more turnovers, but I don't think they should intentionally be trying to turn over the ball. And fortunately, Fred VanVleet being back should help mitigate that deficiency, because when you don't have Fred and you don't have Amen and Jalen Green is your only primary ball handler, yeah, it gets hairy at times, and we saw that against the Magic. I think Fred should have them much more organized offensively, which they'll need against a Suns team that, say what you will about their defense, but Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, Bradley Beal, they will be able to put up points. So it'll be great to see Fred VanVleet back. But I think where we should probably start our discussion when it comes to this game and others to come over the remainder of the homestand is the change to the Rockets rotation over the last week or so, which is Ime Udoka playing this double big lineup with Steven Adams and Alperen Sengun at the same time. Steven is coming back to health after having the sore ankle in the first few weeks of the calendar year, and he looked phenomenal against the Magic, 17 boards in just 23 minutes, 10 offensive. So, the Magic are a team that defensively, they want to grind you out. They can't put up points. And so when you look at a double big lineup, what you worry about is, well, can a team that has a lot of athleticism and shooting space you out and make it to where they just can't hold up defensively? Well, that's probably not going to happen against the Orlando Magic. And conversely, if you're able to crash the offensive glass and get putbacks, you sort of neuter one of their biggest strengths, which is their ability to keep you from scoring. And so it was a good time to try that, and I thought it worked very well for the Rockets. And Really, it has ever since they started using it in the second half of that Indiana game on March 4th, then the two against the Pelicans, although not sure how much you can take out of those Pelicans matchups because obviously that's not a very good team. But Paolo, I'll bring you in on this. I think it's hard to say how much of Ime Udoka turning to the double big lineup is in response to the Amen situation and how much of it is just purely coincidence. But I do think that it comes at a very good time because without Amen and in a stretch where you're not playing very good teams, the fact that there isn't much tape on how to attack this double big lineup, it's a new wrinkle. It might be a little gimmicky, but in the short term, against mediocre to bad teams, I think it can work. I don't know if it's a long-term solution. I don't know if it's something that'll work in the playoffs, but I think for now, in a stretch of the schedule where it could have been very difficult given the Rockets' injuries, I think it's also a shot in the arm for the team to try something new, a new wrinkle at a time in which it would be very easy to sort of give in to the malaise of, the dog days of the NBA calendar, all the injuries piling up. You can see when you talk to these guys in the locker room or you listen to what they say, they're energized by this. It's something new they haven't tried before. And even if it isn't a long-term fit, even if it doesn't necessarily work in the playoffs and you go away from it when Amen comes back, I think the fact that the Rockets are able to lean into this a little more right now, all at the same time that they lose Amen Thompson, it just comes at a pretty perfect time. And so I'm curious your thoughts on the move, both its short and long-term implications. Long-term, I'm still skeptical how it works against a team that has a lot of speed and shooting. But in the short term, Paolo, I'm pretty optimistic. I don't see any reason why it won't be able to work against teams like, the Mavs, the Bulls, the Sixers coming up. The Suns might be a better test because the Suns absolutely do have firepower offensively and they can space you out. But other than the Suns, as far as the teams on the remaining Rockets schedule over these 2 weeks without Amen, it sets up pretty well, right?
So on the level of big lineup, I think being worried about whether or not it works against better teams is actually, to me, not an issue at all. Because we have not struggled to beat the good teams. We've struggled with taking bad losses to the bad teams. So if we have a mechanism, be it a double big lineup that perhaps reduces variance defensively, or if that's the case, then that's perfectly fine. We need to find a way to beat the teams that we have to beat or that we should beat. So if that's all it's good for, then to me, that's a great tool already. But then besides that, I think obviously when we play it, we play 2-3 zone on defense, and which typically requires crisp decision making from teams and not hesitating on shooting. And I think something that as the defense has been worn down throughout the year, that we've been relying more and more on has been the fact that we've been daring teams to shoot a lot, even without the double big lineup. I think any Rockets fan that watches the games can tell that there's stretches where we're giving up wide open threes, and we've been bailed out by teams not shooting the percentages that they should when they're getting mostly wide open looks. I think we give up a lot of open threes, and we are not as punished from it as we should be, not from the beginning of the season, but from the time that the defense has started to fall off, right? And we can say, we're never going to be the team if they shoot 46%. Well, if we defend better at the 3-point line, they'll probably not shoot 46%. But this to say that in comparison, what the double big lineup does is since the defense is not as good as it used to be, and we're giving up these shots anyways, what the double big lineup does is that it still gives up those shots, so we're still taking basically the same risk, but it reduces the risk of giving up offensive rebounds to the other team a lot more, which is something that we have also struggled with, and it's been a point of criticism for the team, lately, I would say. And so to me, it makes sense in that perspective. And then as far as whether it would still work as well with Amen Thompson on the team, I think it's actually not going to be that big of a problem because the spacing is already awful as is. And I know that it's a terrible argument to make, but the spacing is awful as it is anyways. And we are already having to have our bigs or play double big or have our bigs both in the paint when Amen Thompson's playing. And during that stretch where Fred VanVleet was injured, and Larry Easton was injured, and Jabari Smith, and the time that Jabari Smith was injured, we've seen a lot of Jayshawn Tate. And the difference between Jayshawn Tate and Steven Adams, spacing-wise, is actually not that big. You don't want an open Tate 3 to be the shot you're getting, and so we were using these players in the paint, crashing the boards, trying to, make something work, setting screens already. So I think it will still work. It won't work against every team. I think you can't play like this against the Warriors, for example. They'll just torch you. You can't play like this against the Celtics because they're more than willing to take those open threes all the time. But it might work against the Cavs. It might. I'm talking about playoff teams. I think it will probably work against the Lakers. It will probably not work against the Grizzlies, although it might if they're not as willing to use Jaren Jackson as a spacer and Ja's willingness to take the pull-up three, which is iffy at best. And so I think it's definitely a tool that's worth considering. And I think it simplifies the game on defense for all of the players. And it requires less attention to detail on any given possession, which is something that this team has been struggling with because I think fatigues definitely played a factor. I think you can't argue against the fact that Dylan Brooks is a shadow of what he was earlier in the season defensively, and this happened last season as well. Maybe he just gets worn out and his lateral mobility just falls off. I don't know, but it's something that you at this point in the season, the goal is to win as many games as we can and be as good as we can going into the playoffs. And there's no more moves that you can make. Trade deadline's over, so with the tools that you have to try and play, even if it's a flawed type of basketball long term, you have to try and find as many edges as you can. Team should be in playoff mode already. So all in all, I think we shouldn't really even look at it since I think it's a tendency that has been going on with announcing the team because we're coming off of a rebuild, everything's projected long term. To me, this is clearly a tool that's working. Clearly a tool that has already shown results, so it's already worth it that we tried it. If it doesn't work moving forward, it's a question of adapting in time and, hey, we can't run this anymore, teams have figured it out. Or it doesn't fit this specific matchup, for example. And so it's just happy that it worked, happy that they were willing to try it. It's not new within Ime Udoka type of, I guess, adjustments. He obviously tried it with Al Horford and Robert Williams, although both of those guys are more switchable than our guys. But it goes to show that I think the NBA is, since there are, and this is an argument that I've made before, since there are no true overwhelming dynasty type teams like the Warriors or the Cavs with LeBron, teams don't you can run. I think the NBA is rediscovering a lot of things that we weren't able to run because we were just never going to beat those teams with it. And the NBA is rediscovering a lot of strategies that are flawed, but they will work because the other teams are not ready for them or they won't adjust in time or even aren't good enough teams in the league right now to instantly punish it. And so I think it's also a result of the league having more parity. But that's obviously a completely different discussion. I know I've gone on long enough. Just all in all, just happy it happened. Happy that we're going to keep trying it moving forward. And I'm not too worried about if this is going to get exposed. Because if it is, a strategy is still successful if it works for 10 games and then you have to go away from it. We didn't make a trade or we didn't make any long-term commitment. We're not losing anything long-term in order to run this. So why not?
Yeah, and I think you did a good job of laying out some of the longer term considerations as you get ready for what we hope is a playoff run a month or so from now. But in the short term, against these lesser opponents, I think it's really useful as well, because I think what we've seen throughout this year, when you look at the macro and not just the micro, look, the Rockets are a top 5 defense. We saw and have seen flashes of that in recent weeks. We saw it certainly against the Magic on Monday. We saw it when they held the Bucks below 100 a couple of weeks ago into just 13 points in the fourth quarter or whatever it was. But they're a mediocre offense. And when the Rockets really have problems is often when they go on these prolonged droughts and they can't score in the half court. And maybe this will change a little bit with Fred VanVleet back, although I don't know if he'll be 100% right away. I think back to the Cleveland game in January when the Cavs went on that ridiculous run in the fourth quarter, and it took Fred making a couple of threes to finally snap the Rockets out of it. Maybe the need is a little bit less once you get Fred back. But in this stretch of the schedule where the Rockets really can't afford to have bad losses, that's where losing Amen really hurt. He's a very high floor guy, and you need high floor guys right now in games that on paper you need to win before the schedule gets difficult going down the home stretch of the year. We'll talk about the standings on the back half of this pod and who the Rockets can catch, but really 2 through 7 are separated by just 5.5 games. That's a ridiculously small amount when you consider the stakes. If you're the 7 seed, you have to go through the play-in tournament just to advance to the playoffs. Your season could end with just 2 bad nights. And if you're the 2 seed, you're in line to have home court advantage in at least 2 rounds. So there are huge stakes. There's not a lot of margin for error. And when you look at those 6 teams, the Nuggets, the Lakers, the Grizzlies, the Rockets, the Warriors, the Timberwolves, all of them are currently on winning streaks, except for the Lakers, who, of course, are dealing with the LeBron James groin injury. And perhaps the Rockets can run down the Lakers. More on that in a little bit. But the reason I bring all that up is to say that this is a time of year where there's much more of a gap between the good teams and the bad, because the good teams are legitimately trying. They are more dialed in on a game in, game out basis because of the playoffs being right around the corner. And the bad teams are starting to turn their attention to development and next season and tanking, if you want to be blunt. And so with that, there's a huge incentive to not drop games to lesser teams, the likes of which the Rockets are mostly playing on this homestand. I think they're in the middle of a stretch now of 9 straight games against teams with 500 records or worse. And so how can the Rockets lose to a team that on paper they should be better than? The most likely way, and we've seen this at times throughout the year, is that somebody gets hot on the other team and the Rockets go into one of these droughts where, because they don't have that proven 1A, they just can't put the ball in the bucket. Well, the one thing about the double big lineup, when you're playing both Alperen Sengun and Steven Adams, they combined for over 31 rebounds against the Magic earlier this week. You're probably not going to go in a long drought offensively, because even if you aren't shooting well, you're going to get shots and free throws because they just crash the glass. You can use Jabari Smith Jr. as a 6'11" small forward as well, and you get these easy putbacks. You force the other team to foul you. And so it really cuts against what is, in my opinion, the most likely way the Rockets could lose to a lesser team. Now, Phoenix might be the one outlier because Phoenix actually can outscore you. But for the most part, this homestand, when you look at teams like the Magic and certainly the Mavs, the Bulls, the Sixers, what you need is to avoid droughts, and you should be able to rely on your defense, which has shown signs of getting better in recent weeks. And so I think this double big lineup in the short term, it makes a ton of sense, right? And then Jabari at the 3, we'll talk about him in a little bit as well, but Jabari fits into that as well because now you have a huge size advantage there as well. You can even play Tari at the 2, and we know how he crashes the offensive glass. And so to me, in the short term, it's just the perfect counter, and that's what the Rockets need right now. Because look, internally, they were really viewing this Orlando game as important, because what you don't need this time of year is to stack losses. Because if you go on a losing streak, and we saw the way they had the 3-game skid a week ago, and it's allowed the Warriors and the Timberwolves to kind of close the gap, teams can make up ground in a hurry because everyone is dialed in. And I think everyone knows that the Suns are better than their record, or at least they're capable of being better than their record. And so if you had lost to the Magic with all the bad vibes of the Amen injury and uncertainties surrounding Fred, all of a sudden you can lose multiple games. Well, now it looks like even if you do lose the Phoenix game tonight, and I hope they don't, they are favored for a reason, well, you still have this backstop coming up of games against the Mavs, the Bulls, the Sixers, where you should be pretty big favorites. And so, to me, that's where the double big lineup in the short term is really helpful. These games against mediocre to bad opponents, if the Rockets defend at the level they're capable of, and they crash the glass with Adams and Sengun and sometimes Jabari and Tari at the 3, even the 2, you're probably not going to go in the tank offensively. And then as long as you defend at a capable level, you should be fine. And so I guess to sum it all up, the biggest loss to me of taking Amen Thompson out is he is your floor raiser. He is most consistent in terms of his production, his effort from one game to the next. Well, in a very unorthodox way, this is sort of replacing that. This is giving you a way to raise the floor. I think the argument I made on the last pod, ideally you need Alperen Sengun and or Jalen Green to step up. They're your high variance guys during this stretch without Amen. And that's still the case. But the double big lineup is a way that you can really raise the floor. They might do it in a different way. With Amen, it's more his ability to get out in transition, his ability to play make a little bit. We know what he can do off the ball. With Steven and Alpi, it's the way they crash the glass. But regardless, they raise the floor. And in a stretch of the schedule where you're playing bad teams, there's a lot of value in that, right?
Yeah, so I think that goes into what I was saying, which is any tool that can help us, as you said, raise our floor against the bad teams is actually a pretty useful tool, because our young guys, maybe they like the talent from whatever it is. We've seen them get up to play the Cavs. We've seen them get up to play the Celtics. We've seen them get up to play even OKC when we were shorthanded and the time that we beat them. So it's, we, as I said before, we are at a point where we're trying to win games, and anything that contributes to us winning games is a good thing. But I actually wanted to talk about something that I've seen a little bit here and there, which is people talking about the double big lineups hindering like prospect development. And I think that ties in perfectly into what I just said. We're at a point in the team's kind of path where the priority is to win games, right? I guess I'd even not as much dispute the premise, which is, yes, it kind of dumbs down the game a little bit. Playing zone dumbs down the game a little bit, and perhaps you're not exposing guys to the same situations defensively. But it's also kind of bogus, because you're offensively you're making it harder on everybody because the spacing's not as good. You're making Jalen Green have to make multiple reads in the same play. You're making guys have to finish through more people in the paint. Floater games have to be better, everything like that. But all in all, whether it's true or not, it shouldn't matter, because the priority is to win games. And I think going into the season, I think we both said that, yes, the priority is to get to the playoffs, but you still take some consideration into, or you still take into consideration some development, right? If it's close between Reed Shepard and Aaron Holiday, you should give priority to Reed Shepard because he's younger, and you factor that in, right? At this point, even though Reed is hurt, I would argue even against that. I would say that the priority is, even if we are just a point better with someone over someone who is younger, we should run with the person that's 1 point better, because that's the goal here. And that has to be the approach with which fans look at the games now. It's all about winning, and if nothing else, getting further into higher pressure situations also has that development impact. And I don't know, it seems to me like you're kind of trying to find ways to be upset, not
Right.
Actually looking at it from a constructive standpoint.
Right. And for this season, the majority of the data is in. You've played 65 of 82 games. So it would take something incredibly unlikely to dramatically change the narrative about any of these players or the team as a whole heading into the off season. So I sort of reject the premise that, you shouldn't play Alperen Sengun and Steven Adams together because it's the modern NBA. You don't see many two center lineups, and you should be gambling on, more minutes for, I guess it's Cam Whitmore at this point because Reed Shepard's hurt. I just think at this point, most of the data is baked in. And so with 17 games left, what happens with the standings and maximizing your ability to win is far more important, because whether this team makes the playoffs or not and gets to stress test this model under the bright lights is huge. We've talked about it all season long, and now they're just a month away. There is so much value before you have to make big decisions on the contract extensions for the next round of year 3 guys, Jabari Smith Jr. and Tari Eason, before we talk about big-time trade possibilities, Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, those types of names that we know will come up in the offseason. To be able to see what you have. If you go the full season being in the top 4 of the West, a lot of it in the top 2 or 3, and you fall to the play-in tournament and a bad night or two knocks you out, that's brutal. And you lose the opportunity to see how your guys perform, which is at a macro level what this season was about. That was the goal, and you've been in position to accomplish that nearly the whole way. And if you let it slip away with a bad final month, that's the kind of thing that can have repercussions and ripple effects that are felt for a long time. So, yeah, I just reject the whole premise that there needs to be a priority on stylistically how you play and it being compatible with prospect development and the way you're likely to play, months, years down the line when you're really trying to contend. No, I think at this point of the year, you're just trying to scratch together wins, especially without Amen Thompson, because so much of your model is built on having Amen as something of a Swiss Army knife to cover up a lot of weaknesses. His style of play is so complementary that he helps a lot of your other young guys. Well, without Amen, your model isn't what it typically is anyway, and you're almost out of regular season games, and you're playing lesser teams where, let's be honest, the question would be there of how, even if you do play in a more stylistically compatible way with the so-called future version of the Rockets, well, people will say, okay, Jalen went out and had big games, or Cam went out and had big games against, the Mavs, the Bulls, the Sixers. How's that going to translate down the road against better teams? The same question would still be there. So I just don't think the juice is anywhere near worth the squeeze when you look at the value of simply winning games and maximizing your odds of getting to the playoffs and accomplishing your big picture goals, which is seeing how the team performs under the bright lights in April and hopefully May. I think at this point, it's all about winning. And if you think Steven Adams and Alperen Sengun playing them together gives you a better chance to do that, and I think the data bears that out when you look at, the sample is still small, but clearly it's one of the Rockets' best two-man groupings of this entire season. It's looked very, very good. And so if in the short term you can win with it, you take those and run, and you can worry about the longer-term concerns at a latter time, especially when you're at a point in the year where it's really too late to dramatically change the narratives for any of these guys to begin with. That's the macro. And then the micro on this, I don't even necessarily agree that there's not data points that can still be taken on some of these younger guys when played with the double big lineup. And one recent example is Jabari Smith Jr. Look, when he's at the 3 and he said after Monday's game against the Magic that he really likes it, he has a huge advantage crashing the glass against smaller defenders. He has a little more freedom on the perimeter to be sort of the primary creator at times. Now, perhaps that changes some when Fred VanVleet comes back. Certainly it will when Amen is back in a week or two. But Jabari as an offensive, I don't want to call him an engine because he's not that, but as more of a scorer is clearly good for this team. He put up 20 against the Magic, went 4 of 8 on threes in the second half. And the Rockets are now 12-1 this year when he scores at least 15 points. And it makes sense that for a team that on the balance of the season is very good defensively, but average offensively, well, Jabari as a player is fairly average offensively, at least in terms of his scoring, but is clearly good defensively when you look at his value to the team in terms of how they defend, how they rebound. When he picks up his deficiency, and I'm not saying he's bad offensively, he's just worse compared to the defensive end, then the team's results are going to follow because you're taking one of your most relied upon players and you're mitigating that weakness, which just so happens to be the weakness for the team overall as well. And so the sample is still small. I will say that in the 4 games since Ime went to this double big lineup, starting with the Indiana game, that they came back in and took a lead before running out of gas and lost, and then the 3-game winning streak since. So the 4 games of double big, small sample, but Jabari's averaging over 15 points a game. That's that magic number where the Rockets are 12-1 when Jabari scores at least 15. And he's shooting about 46% overall and 41% from 3. So these are very good numbers. The sample is small, but I bring it up to say there's value in seeing how it translates. And if you get a better version of Jabari because he plays more at the 3, certainly he's versatile enough defensively to survive there, at least against most threes. then you're learning something that's going to tell you about Jabari's long-term value in a summer in which you're going to have to decide how much you're willing to extend him for, and so on and so forth. So beyond the fact that it's about winning, I also don't even agree with the premise that you can't learn about prospects with the double bigs, because we're learning about Jabari and the sample is still small, but we've learned good things over the past week. And if it continues over the remainder of this season, then yeah, then maybe that opens up, some eyes around Toyota Center to where the Rockets look at Jabari in a different light moving forward and what he's capable of doing. And perhaps he's even more versatile moving forward. We know he can be a small ball center, which Ime Udoka loves to deploy against zone defenses because of the spacing, but there might be some matchups where you benefit from having him at the 3 and being able to crash the glass because of how much this offense depends on offensive rebounding. So beyond just the macro factors and winning games to get to the playoffs, the micro of how this seems to be helping Jabari, that's of note as well, especially when, again, Jabari's scoring success is so strongly correlated, or at least appears to be, with success for the Rockets. And so, Paolo, I'll bring you in on that, because moving forward with Fred coming back, but Amen still being probably week and a half, 2 weeks away, how do you play this? Because I think we can probably agree, and the numbers bear it out, that the Rockets are a better team when they get a good offensive version of Jabari Smith Jr. And so with Fred back, you're going to have 4 starters for sure, and Fred, Dylan Brooks, Jalen Green, and Alperen Sengun. And then you have Tari Eason and Jabari Smith Jr. And those two have sort of alternated. Most of the year, Jabari has started. Since the All-Star break, and perhaps some of this is Jabari coming back from the hand issue, but Tari has more often than not started over Jabari. And so you can make the argument of start Jabari to max out his minutes in much the same way we talked about needing to start Amen so that, he's not artificially capped in the 28 range. It's easier to go 30, 35 plus. If Jabari is this important to you offensively, then, you start him. It's much easier for him to get to higher minutes and have more opportunities, at least in theory. You could also argue that, hey, if you bring him off the bench, it's easier to make him the offensive focal point, and as opposed to sort of becoming a stationary shooter in the corner or on the wing and letting guys like Jalen or Alperen Sengun do the playmaking, even if the minutes are a little bit lower because he's coming off the bench and that might cap you at 28, 30 minutes at the most nights, then he's able to offset that because he's being used in a different way that lets him be much more of a focal point of the offense. So I think there's arguments you can make both ways. I still don't think he'll start when Amen comes back. I think it's pretty clear that Ime's preference is Fred, Jalen, Dylan, Amen, and Sengun. But there may be a stretch, there probably will be a stretch, with Fred back but Amen not. And so there's multiple ways you could sort of tap into or try to tap into the best version of Jabari. I think we can agree that peak Jabari, at least offensively, is good for this team. So, Paolo, what's your strategy on how they should try to bring that out over the next couple of weeks?
You asked this question, and obviously because of the Magic game, it's not completely surprising. But when I was running through the outline for what we were going to talk about on the pod, it actually got me thinking about a lot more than just how can we maximize them. First, I think the way to maximize them is, if you want to give him more offensive rep, it's probably to bring him off the bench. Having him be the 3 is interesting because he's going to be bigger than most 3s. When it comes to how you use the more interesting part, because when Jabari was drafted, we had Jalen Green, we had KPJ, we had Sengun. So, and because Jabari was...
Knicks.
Oh, no.
Lottery talent.
And because of that, and because of how much he struggled his first year shooting, it was very easy to put him aside as someone who had shot creating upside. And as time went on, we started using him some in typical shooter type of possessions, right? Just a quick screen into a mid-range shot, just spotting up, and eventually he progressed this to a point where he could attack closeout, and we were at the time we were happy that he was developing more of an around the rim and around the basket type of game as well, because that was a real concern when he was in college and his early time in the NBA. He struggled, and then there was the entire shift in how the team worked. Ime Udoka came in. Alperen Sengun is now focal point of the offense. Jalen Green's obviously going to get shots. Dylan Brooks, for a defensive player, gets a lot of shot creation offensively. Fred VanVleet obviously runs the pick and roll. And it was very easy. And now with Amen Thompson being an initiator as well, Jabari just fell out down the pecking order, and I feel like he's developed over the years, and it's time to see if there's something there, right? And I'm talking about, especially with the injuries. I'm surprised that obviously his injury obviously didn't help you, but it's intriguing because we typically talk about this team's half-court offense as being struggling and being highly, highly, highly dependent on Jalen Green as the only guy besides Alperen Sengun who can get his own shot basically at will because he's so athletic. He always has the step back. He can take a mid-range shot. He can get a shot off basically. Not always a good shot, but if you need someone to get a shot off, you probably turn to him. But it kind of threw me back to a time where, and I'm specifically remembering about, I think it was year 2 for Jabari. No, not year 2. Was it rookie year? Probably was rookie year. The game winner he had at the buzzer.
March 23. It was the waning days of Steven Silas. Yes. Late rookie
exactly.
year Jabari.
And back then it was a real discussion. Hey, if we need someone to take the last shot in the game, Jabari's a pretty good candidate because he can get a shot off anyways. And I feel like that faded. Yeah, and I feel like that faded away. This year, nobody talks about it. And I think one of the most reliable shots that we can get that Jabari has been making recently is those fadeaway mid-range shots, which I think since the injury he's actually gotten a lot better at. It makes you wonder, well, he did make some progress driving to the rim. He uses his body a lot better than he used to, and this team's not good offensively in the half court at all. So it's actually really, really intriguing to explore more Jabari Smith as a shot creator by himself. And I'm talking posts, I'm talking face-ups, yeah. And it might kind of solve if it works, it's definitely very useful in the offseason because the game's going to slow down and he's exactly the type of player you need. It becomes an interesting point as well. Well, then how far into it do you explore? Do you is he ready to handle some pick and roll situations, right? Where you have a big set of screen for him and not necessarily needing him to come off of a screen. You can have someone set the screen for him. Is that something that is the handle good enough to get to that? We've seen him run some pick and pop with Jalen Green, but that's not the types of plays that I'm specifically talking about. You could always run that, but I'm specifically talking about exploiting him on the ball as a shot creator. And especially in the current state of the team where we're talking about trading for KD in the offseason. And, well, if Jabari shows flashes of being an on-ball shot creator, something that we haven't explored way back to basically his rookie season, to me, it actually makes it make even more sense for you to go after a guy like KD because he's someone who's, basically been his entire career in situations where he has to create his own shot at the size that Jabari has. And obviously Jabari is not as fluid, never will be, not going to have the same game as KD, but he could have a Michael Porter Jr. type of offensive game when you combine that with his defensive versatility. That's a very, very, very valuable player. There's a lot of untapped potential or at least a lot of data to be collected on what Jabari can be. And I think because of how much he struggled this rookie season, we've kind of doomed him to, if he's definitely going to be a role player. Yeah. And we haven't really explored any more than that. And the same goes to a lesser extent to Tari Eason, but I feel like Tari Eason actually gets a lot more, or probably because he's more confident and he just,
it feels like Tari just doesn't have the filter. He's always willing to let it fly in a way that Jabari, for whatever reason, is sometimes more content to sort of slip into a secondary role.
Exactly. And I think it's definitely something that's, that you might have something there that you're not exploring. And I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that it's actually something that's ready to go right now. And since the team is kind of scrambling to find ways to score on offense, it's definitely, I think it's not just intriguing. I think it will almost be malpractice to not do it. Especially because going into the offseason, there's no telling who we're going to trade, in the search for a star player. And a lot of people bring up Jabari Smith, and he's always one of the guys that are like, wait, he's probably going to be valued less by the other team than we should be valuing him. So he's not exactly the best player, right? And listen, there's a lot of guys out there that there's a lot of ground between being KD and being PJ Tucker, or between being KD and being, I don't know, call it PJ Washington. No, I guess PJ Washington has actually got a pretty good bag, but between the 3-and-D role player, the Robert Covington, and the Kevin Durant, there's a lot of DeAndre Hunters. There's a lot of Jalen Johnsons. There's a lot of, as I just said, a lot of PJ Washingtons. There's a lot of Michael Porter Jr.'s on the higher end offensively. And you might have one of those guys and you don't know yet. And perhaps maybe like some of these other guys that I listed earlier in their careers, they were maybe not given the chance, but then nobody thought PJ Washington was as good of a bucket getter as he was until he got to the Mavericks and they had some injuries, and then all of a sudden, oh wait, he's basically the third scorer on this team. Not this year, obviously, but last year. And so all of this really, really, really long thing to say. Jabari was a number 3 pick. There's a lot of talent there, and this team does not have the luxury in the half court to not explore what could be there, especially because he can get the shot off. Give him volume. Let's see how he does in volume.
And so you're thinking off the bench because that gives him the best chance at volume.
Yep, exactly. Especially without Amen. And once Amen comes back, he's going back to the starting lineup, so it will make even more sense.
Gotcha. All right, we'll see tonight. I will say that Phoenix is something of an outlier matchup simply because of the scoring potential. So whatever Ime decides, be it Tari or Jabari as the 5th starter alongside Fred, assuming he plays, and then Jalen, Dillon, and Sengun, who are locks, I wouldn't necessarily take it as a lock that it will be that way for the remainder of the period without Amen, because it could be that you think you need, well, it could be more offense or it could be more defense to slow them, but the needs against the Suns are different than they are against a team like the Mavs, the Bulls. It could also be influenced by Tari's availability. The Mavs and Bulls games are back-to-back, both at home, but at this point, Tari's not been cleared to play on both ends of a back-to-back. Perhaps he will be this weekend. They have not ruled it out, but we don't know as of our recording time. I just say all that to offer a word of caution that whatever Ime ultimately decides tonight, I wouldn't think that it's necessarily set in stone for the future games. So it's a storyline to still keep your eyes peeled for over the remainder of this homestand and certainly the remainder of the 10 to 14 days that they're likely to be without Amen Thompson. All right, so last segment of today's pod, I mentioned the standings earlier, and we've talked a lot in recent weeks, especially when the Rockets were struggling, about the teams behind them. And, this time of year, it feels like everybody that's the contender is stacking wins because the gap between the teams that are trying and the teams that aren't are bigger than ever because of the end of the season approaching and because of the playoffs approaching. So when the Rockets were on a 3-game sked, which they were this time a week ago, we saw teams like the Warriors and the Timberwolves that were on longer winning streaks getting closer, and it, raised some alarm bells. And even though the Rockets have started winning games, they haven't actually gained separation over the Warriors Timberwolves just yet. Well, they are still up 3-4 games. So they haven't built it back up to the 5-6 game buffer that it was because those teams are still winning. However, even without Amen, I think there's reasonable optimism. The double big lineup, Jabari coming on, and most notably the weaker schedule, but the Rockets actually can, especially at home where they're 22-10 and have won 5 of 6 since the All-Star break, to stack some wins. And so if some other teams finally lose, as their schedules get more difficult, and on paper, for the most part, they are, then the Rockets can perhaps regain some separation over teams that have gained on them a little bit in recent weeks, and perhaps pass some teams that jumped ahead of the Rockets when, especially in early February, when they were at the peak of their injury crisis, pushed the Rockets from 2 or 3 in the Western Conference standings, the way they were for most of December and January, down to the 4 or 5 range, which is where they've been, it feels like, for the last 2 or 3 weeks. So as opposed to the Warriors and Timberwolves, because we talked about, how the Rockets need to hold them off. And even with the recent surge, the Rockets are still largely in control of, where they stand relative to those two. And quite frankly, they can be passed by one of those and still be fine. As long as you're in the top six, we've said it before. I think the Rockets are more than happy to let the chips fall as they may, as long as they get in that top six, because with as much parity as there is in the West, you can be a 6 seed and probably be favored in the first round if the 3 seed is Memphis. You can be the 2 seed and probably an underdog if the 7 seed is the Warriors or the Timberwolves. So it's about just getting in and then hope for the best when it comes to matchups, health, getting hot at the right time, all those types of factors. So in terms of ultimately getting in the top six, which they're at right now, I mean, certainly need to hold off the teams beneath you, but also you could run down one or more teams in front of you. Because in that world, even if the Warriors and or Timberwolves go on a long run, well, if you pass a team like the Grizzlies or the Lakers, then okay, you can get passed by the Warriors or Timberwolves and still be in the top six. Or if the Rockets truly have stabilized things and are figuring things out with the double big lineup, then if you get in the top four, you guarantee yourself home court advantage in at least one round of the playoffs, and the Rockets have been a lot better at home this season. Again, 22-10. You get up to the 2 line, you're in position to have home court advantage in at least 2 rounds of the playoffs. So there's a lot of benefits if you can chase down one of these teams in front of you. And I feel like when the Rockets were losing games, we've been more focused on the teams behind the Rockets, just saying, how do the Rockets hold on and make sure they're in the top six? Well, now that things are stabilizing, let's look at the teams ahead of them, because even though the Rockets are still at 5, there's 2 games of separation between the Rockets at 5 and the Denver Nuggets, who are currently at 2. The loss column, which is what matters the most, Nuggets have 23 losses, Lakers have 23, Grizzlies have 24, Rockets have 25. Rockets already have the tiebreaker over the Grizzlies. They have a lead in the tiebreaker over both the Nuggets and Lakers, although it's still to be determined based on individual matchups, head-to-head that is, and how they go down the home stretch of the year. So, Paolo, I'm curious your thoughts on which of the 3 teams in front of the Rockets is most likely to be caught. I think a lot of people would say Memphis because they're only a game ahead now. They're likely to be without Jaren Jackson Jr., who sprained an ankle for at least another week or so. But I'm actually leaning to the Lakers. They've lost 2 straight games since LeBron strained his groin. It's an issue he struggled a lot with over his career. Everybody talks about Memphis' schedule being difficult. It's the 5th most difficult, according to Tankathon, for the remainder of the season. The Lakers is even harder. It's the 4th most difficult. For perspective, the Rockets are at 15. The Nuggets are at 11. The Lakers have lost 2 in a row. They're the one exception to the general rule of teams in this 2 through 7 mix, winning now that, the gap between the try-hard teams and the tanking teams is wider than ever. And especially when you look at their schedule over the next couple of weeks that they're likely to be without LeBron, they have 2 different back-to-backs in the next 8 days against the Nuggets and the Bucks, which is crazy to have back-to-backs in consecutive weeks against the same 2 opponents and opponents in different conferences nonetheless. The Lakers are probably, without LeBron, going to be underdogs in all 4 of those games. I think you can also argue that, I think people are down on Memphis, but their point differential for the year is almost +6 per game. And they've been just very unlucky in close games. They're probably due to win some of those. And in fact, they have their last 2. They came back to beat the Pelicans and held on against the Suns the other night. The Lakers, their point differential is less than +2. So they've been a little lucky. And as good as they are with LeBron and Luka, well, A, LeBron is out for the time being, and B, there's not much tape. Just if we talk about the Rockets being, able to sort of use the double big lineup even more now because there's not a ton of tape for opposing teams to know how they want to attack it. The Luka trade happening on the fly means that there hasn't been a lot of tape on how this new look Lakers team functions. And so it makes it even easier to sort of just ride the brilliance, especially in close games, of your 2 transcendent guys. Well, now you take away one of the transcendent guys and you have more tape on how the new look Lakers look and how they function. To me, that team is the one that looks like a sitting duck to me, especially when their peripherals have been underwhelming all along. Yes, I know some of those peripherals were when they had Anthony Davis and not Luka, but still, I think they apply to an extent. And when you look at the schedule coming up without LeBron, when you look at the trend line, I actually think it's the Lakers and not the Grizzlies that are most likely to be caught. I would rank it as Lakers most likely, Grizzlies second, and then Nuggets least likely, simply because, the Nuggets have Nikola Jokic. They're at the 2 line right now, and they have the easiest schedule of the 3. So my ranking of who the Rockets are most likely to pass among those 3, and thus who I'm watching the closest: Lakers 1, Memphis 2, Denver 3. What are your rankings?
This is going to be really underwhelming because they're the exact same. I bet you expected me to say the Grizzlies first. I'm actually not
I did,
going to. I'm actually not going to, for all of the reasons that you said, because I think that they're more talented. I think they're more well-rounded. And I think they've just gotten really, really unlucky, and the point differential, speaks volumes for it. I think, and this is not a new take, if you follow me on Twitter, and I think I talked about this on the pod, I don't rate the Lakers as currently constructed. I think they're a flawed team. Jackson Hayes is not reliable to be a big man. You're not going to rely on Austin Reeves to go off for 20 points like he has done. I think he's averaging over 20 points over his last 15 or 20 games, something crazy. And especially with a flawed team, the surprise factor may kick in while teams are adjusting, but eventually teams are going to figure out how you're playing, and they're going to figure out that you have a weakness. Besides that, I also think that they're the most likely of these 3 teams to have to rest players or have guys miss the residual game because, well, LeBron is just old and Luke is coming off of an injury. And as you said, 2 back-to-backs especially mean that you could probably exploit that. On the other hand, they'll probably be the most favored team from officiating, which I know is a contentious topic on the podcast. But at the same time, as long as they make the playoffs, I mean, the league might want them to have home court advantage. But from a logical standpoint, looking at the teams, the Lakers are, to me, the weakest team. They also are the team that I would rather play in the playoffs, even though they have Luka, who always touches us. And second, it's the Grizzlies, just because I think the Nuggets had a rough start to the season, but they're in full gear now, and they just beat the Thunder, and you don't really need much else. You don't really need to say much else when you beat a team that is still in contention to win 70 games if they just win out the rest of the season. If we're probably, they're probably not going to be losing too many games, and we have to,
Although the Thunder did lose Jalen Williams in that game, but still.
Yeah, I think as long as we make the playoffs, I'll be fine with it. I'm saying we're talking about this, but I don't think it's too relevant to me. And just as a closing thought for the pod, my goal right now is get to 50 wins, go 10-7 the rest of the way, and I'll be happy. Whatever seed that matches us up against, I'd really rather it not be the Nuggets, but I think the Nuggets are getting the 2 seed, so it won't matter anyways. I don't think we're dropping all the way to 7. If we do, it's a catastrophe. So between the Grizzlies or the Lakers, or potentially if we got all the way to the 2 seed, which I don't think is happening, maybe whoever is at 7, I don't think I don't think any of them are unbeatable. I think we have beaten the Grizzlies, so there's precedent for that. And with the Lakers, or the new version of the Lakers, I just don't think they're as good as people are making them out to be. So yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's Lakers, I think, most likely, Grizzlies, and then the Nuggets. I will say, just to spice it up, I'll throw it back to you. We ranked it from most likely to least likely. Do you think it's likely? Would you say it's more likely that we don't make it off first seed, or it's more likely that we do?
I think they do it. And I might be a little too high on this current 3-game winning streak, but I do genuinely think the defense is showing positive signs. I like the way the schedule shapes up. And I think the Lakers, I can't get past the peripherals. I can't get past LeBron at 40 with the groin injury, and then the schedule. Look, I know the Rockets have the tiebreaker over the Grizzlies, but I think, the Rockets do have to go to LA twice on March 31st and April 11th. As long as the Rockets just win one of those 2 games, because they only play the Lakers 3 times, they'll have the tiebreaker. And if they don't, then it's probably a non-starter, because if you lose 2 games to the Lakers, which you would by virtue of going 0-2, and you're already 2 games back in the loss column, I doubt the Rockets outplay them by 4 or 5 games over the other, 15 games or whatever it is left on the schedules for the two teams. So I think all in all, for this to be a conversation, the Rockets are likely to need to win one of those 2 games against the Lakers, and I think they honestly can. I think the athleticism for the Rockets should put them in a good matchup position against them. I've seen you make that argument on Twitter. I agree with you. And one final point that I would raise on the Lakers, I've seen some say, well, the schedule is more difficult on paper than it's actually likely to be because they play the Thunder twice in the last week of the season. Actually, they play the Thunder on Sunday the 6th and Tuesday the 8th of April, which is about a week before the playoffs, or before the end of the regular season, and about 2 weeks before the playoffs. And both games are in Oklahoma City. Historically, that's when your playoff teams are actually those that are secure in their seed, which the Thunder are likely to be, almost certain to be at number 1. That's when they're most likely to play their regulars because you don't want them to get rusty. If it was the last weekend of the year, yeah, they'll shut guys down because at that point, any, rolled ankle like we just saw Amen suffer against the Pelicans can take you out. But you don't want guys to get rusty from not playing competitively for 2 weeks into the playoffs. So the fact that these 2 road games at Oklahoma City, I've seen the argument that, that's artificially making the Lakers' schedule look more difficult than it actually is because of when the games are played. No, I think the Thunder, assuming health, are likely to take those games as sort of a, their true playoff test and then rest the final week of the year. So I think all in all, it sets up pretty well, and I think the Rockets are going to do it. I'm going to be optimistic and say that they get it done. I am worried about the Warriors, who have a pretty damn soft schedule, and the Timberwolves, who, by the way, have the softest schedule of any team in the West. So it's not impossible the Rockets could get caught. But yeah, if the Rockets run down a team that's currently 2 ahead of them in the loss column, it's hard to envision a world where they then get passed by a team like the Warriors or Timberwolves that are currently 3 or 4 back. So I think if we're going to be optimistic and say that the Rockets catch one of these teams in front of them, it's probably difficult to envision a team that's currently 3 or 4 back passing them at the same time unless they go on some historic winning streak of 15, 20 plus games. Hopefully that will not be the case. Let's be optimistic. And you know what? Let's end the pod right there because it feels like some of our recent pods have been on the more negative side. Now the Rockets have won 3 straight games. We're talking about them actually potentially passing teams ahead of them in the standings. Hopefully that's what happens over the remaining 17 games of the regular season for the Rockets starting tonight against the Phoenix Suns. Anyway, that's a good place to wrap it for today. And if you want more content for our next show in a week or so, the best place to get that is online, where you can follow me on Twitter or X at Ben Dubose and this show at The Logger Line. Of course, if you go to the Logger Line's page, you can find our link tree in the bio. That's got links to our distribution partners like Apple, Google, and Spotify. If you'd be kind enough to subscribe and leave a positive review at your location of choice, we would greatly appreciate that. Also, on that same link tree, you can find links to friends, sponsors, partners of the program, USA Today's Rockets Wire, Carbach Brewing, Sports Talk 790. Hit up those links and you can enjoy their content as well. All right, with those plugs complete, we'll adjourn for today. For Paolo, I'm Ben. Thanks as always for listening, and please come back soon for another new episode of The Logger Line.